Hi everyone, my name is Bryan and today we're going to be talking about test preparation, what to do before and during the exam. Essentially, in talking about that, we're not really going to be focusing much about like the long study process. We're more so going to be focusing on if it's 48 hours before the exam, what should I do to prepare? During the exam, we're really going to be talking about, once you get into the exam room, and then what to do while you're taking the test to perform well on it. So a little bit about me. I work as a graduate assistant at the Tutoring and Academic Success Center, otherwise known as TASC. In my schoolwork, I'm in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Master's Program here at CSU. And some of my hobbies include reading, writing, going for walks, and playing video games. So today's questions in terms of this presentation. What should I do to prepare well for my exam 48 hours before it happens? So again, like we said at the start, not as much how do I go about studying, but what do I do when there's only 2 days left before this exam to prepare? And also, what should I do during the exam to perform well on it? So when I get to the exam room, what should I do right before the exam to prepare? And what should I do during the exam to perform well? First thing we need to talk about in terms of the test preparation of the 48 hours before the exam is the recognition of the different sides of us, the different sides of you. So a lot of times with test preparation, the thing we really like to focus on is the cognitive. It's a test, so we think that, of course, that it's all about what we know. It's all about information. It's all about being able to apply information. Truth of the matter is, though, test preparation is not just limited to information and not just limited to making sure that knowledge is in the brain. There's also other aspects of us that truly do still matter during exams, during preparing for exams. And this is especially the case in the 48 hours before. So to start off this discussion, let's talk about the cognitive. So the especially important thing about the cognitive in the 48 hours before is to recognize that the goal is to make clarity, not concrete. At this point, we shouldn't be putting down cement. The cement should already be hardening and it should be becoming concrete. The information should already be there and it should already be kind of like implanted, already set in stone of what the content is. Now we're more so just looking for potholes to fill with cement so that when it comes time for the test, we can see, okay, in these last 48 hours, what is stuff I still consistently don't get right? What is stuff I'm still missing when I do my practice runs? What is stuff I still cannot say with confidence without looking back at my notes? Studying in chunks, not crams. So rather than going for the 8-hour cram session in the 2 days before, or even the 5 hours cram session the day before, or even the 3-hour cram session the day before, really what we want to do is to study in 30 to 45 or an hour at most minute/hour chunks rather than studying in the large crams. This way we have frequent practice rather than like one giant space of practice. Remind yourself, I have studied. So in addition to there being such a thing as test anxiety, there's such a thing as pre-test anxiety. There's such a thing as us becoming worried before an exam so much that it causes us to be anxious and makes us to overstudy or to start to become in a self-defeating mindset. Reminding yourself, I have studied, helps you to realize, okay, there really has been some work I've put in, so there's some areas I don't need to work on in these last 48 hours. Keep other classes and obligations in mind. Our mind still needs to put efforts towards other things as it comes to the 48 hours before. Just because we have an exam doesn't mean our other coursework or our other obligations are not gone. And we need to make sure we have the mental space for those different obligations. The social aspect. So in terms of socializing, I have an exam is no excuse to isolate yourself. It's not an excuse to say, okay, I don't need to talk with others. I can just wall myself away from others. No, we still have social needs just as much during an exam week as any other time. When it comes time to the 48 hours before, we need to make sure we're staying connected with friends and family, making time to actually talk with one another and reach out to one another. Making time for leisure activities with others, especially. There needs to be some type of relaxation, and there needs to be some type of relaxation where it's not just us on our own. As it comes to the social aspect in relation to kind of academics, taking time to talk with classmates to clarify any misunderstood concepts in the 48 hours before. Making sure that if there really is something you just cannot find on your own, reaching out to other students. The physical aspect. I have an exam, just as that's not an excuse for not socializing, is also not an excuse for staying stagnant and not moving our body. I have an exam is not an excuse to ignore your body's need for physical movement and engagement. What we should do instead in the 48 hours before is to make time to physically move our body and to get outside, especially during these remote semesters where if our classes, there's a good chunk of them online, it's especially important to make sure that we're getting physical and moving our body rather than just sitting and staying in our seat all the time studying. Take breaks to stretch around your body and move around, especially again for these remote semesters, making sure that when we're taking breaks, we're not just going to something digital, but we're also taking time to stretch, to move our body around like this. Taking time to stretch and move around rather than keeping the body inactive. In fact, it's suggested that we have 1 hour of physical engagement per day. And lastly, for pre-test, the physiological aspect. I have an exam is no excuse to skip out on our basic life needs. Food, sleep, those things are still needed in the time before an exam. Don't skip meals, and especially don't save meals for later. In fact, saving meals for later, what can happen is it can mess up with your body's systems if you're eating it past a certain hour. Sometimes it's usually like 7 p.m. Eating late can especially mess kind of with our sleep as well to cause us bodily discomfort both during our sleep and once we wake up. Again, your body still needs sleep during exam season. It's suggested that we get 8 hours of sleep. Now, if we're being real, most of us are probably not at 8 hours, so making sure that we're still getting the amount that we were getting before, if it's at least at a reasonable level. And of course, staying hydrated, making sure you're getting your liquid intake. And I'm not saying coffee liquid intake or sugary beverage liquid intake. No, we're talking water, we're talking any types of beverages that aren't high in sugar or caffeine. So that's the 48 hours before the exam. But what about during the exam? What about during once you get to the exam and while you're taking it? What do we need to do to properly prepare and to perform successfully? Well, with the exam, there's 3 kind of aspects to it. There's the mind, there's the methods, and there's the motion. Starting with the mind, what's funny enough, we put so much of an emphasis on the mind in studying, but one thing we fail to realize sometimes is the fact that the mind for an exam can be both a help and a hindrance. A positive mind that has studied and can know that it's studied can be very beneficial to a test. But when our mind is so packed, when we're so focused on, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to do, or I think I'm not going to do well, that can be a hindrance to us. So we need to make sure we have the right mindset going into the exam. When you get to the exam room, don't study or talk to classmates while you wait for the exam. It can be really tempting to be like, oh, I just need to make sure I get this last concept studied in, or I want to check how others feels about this because I don't know how I feel about it. But really, that can make it a lot harder or more discouraging to take the exam. In studying last minute, it can make us doubt ourselves about what we studied before, thinking, oh, maybe I studied this now and this it wasn't what it was before, and I actually don't remember what it is anymore. And talking to others, most likely, everyone is kind of a little bit anxious and a little bit unsure about how they're going to do. And hearing that isn't really going to help us to feel any better about it. Sometimes it may even discourage us or feel like we're also not going to do well. So making sure to not study or talk to classmates while you wait for the exam. Focus on the fact that you have studied, that you have put in the time, and not on what you may have missed. This can be especially important for that positive mindset attitude, making sure we can come into the exam thinking that we're going to do well, rather than thinking, oh, I missed this, I missed that, I'm going to fail. Because odds are, if we come into the exam thinking we're going to do bad, yeah, we're going to do bad. And then also challenging any thoughts of failure with evidence of study. When we can point to a specific point in time and be like, yeah, I studied there, so I'm going to do well, that can very much challenge those negative thoughts of saying, oh, I'm going to fail, this is going to go bad, this is going to go awful. Not only the mind, but the methods as well. So focusing on narrowing answers, not finding answers. A lot of times when we're taking exams, we really want to focus on, okay, which out of these options is the correct answer, or what is this all about? But as one of my textbooks talks about back there on my shelf, is the fact that sometimes the best way we define something is by defining what it's not. So as we're working on exams, taking time to narrow down what really the question is, narrowing down the answers, crossing off answers we know just are not correct, or crossing off concepts that we know just are not related to the question. Which then leads into the second point, highlight important aspects of the question. Highlight important aspects of the question that help you to determine what you think the concept will be about and what terms you know are commonly associated with that topic. One thing I even like to do is to highlight the prefixes and suffixes of words, because even though I may not know what psychoaffective means, I do know what psychology means, that it's the study of the mind, and that can help me to determine that it has to do with something with the mind in relation to affect, whatever that may be. And then I can use that in my answers to determine, okay, whichever one has to do with the mind has to be part of the answer. So highlighting important aspects of the question. Reference previous questions for current questions. Sometimes instructors have questions that have content that helps you with a question later. Or even just looking back and thinking what you thought of that answer and why you were able to eliminate it. Sometimes us knowing why we eliminated answers on one part of the test can help us to determine answers on another part of the test. So even though I may not have used this chapter 2 term over here and eliminated it as an answer, when it comes time later to the exam and that chapter 2 concept comes up, maybe it's the answer because I know I eliminated it over here because it had to do with this. Take notes on your exam if possible. Some exams let you just write on it, and definitely use that space. What I really like to do, I like to justify why I'm removing an answer by writing it on it. That way, I can, when I come back, if I look back through my answers, I can see, okay, this isn't just me making an initial guess as to why this answer doesn't go with this question, but I have a reasoning as to why I didn't put it there. And then, of course, answering every question. What's interesting to see is that a lot of times students miss points because they just don't answer every question. It may sound simple, but this can be one of the best tips because 0.1 points is still more points than 0 points. What I especially like to do with that, checking back through every question to make sure everything was answered, making sure that I was able to get to every question and at least give some type of answer. And then lastly, the motion. This speaks of kind of the pace at which you're approaching the exam, how fast or how slow you're approaching it. Remember, an exam's not a race. Take the exam at your pace and not the pace of others. Some students already know they didn't study and aren't going to do well, so them finishing doesn't necessarily mean that they knew the content or that the content was easy. So taking the exam at your pace and not at the speed of others. Skip questions you cannot easily answer and come back later. It's much easier for us to answer easy questions first and then make sure there's time later to answer the harder questions. One thing that I especially like to do when it comes to questions I don't immediately know the answer to is I like to put a star next to it. So that way when I go back through and check all my questions, I can see, okay, I actually didn't answer this one. I need to answer it right now. I need to think about it. Skipping those questions. Reference the clock, but don't focus on it. So the interesting thing about time management for an exam is the fact that time is important, but also time can become a hindrance if we're focusing too much on it. By looking at the clock and becoming anxious about it, it can get in the way of us completing questions. So making sure that we're still keeping the clock in mind, still keeping the time in mind, while at the same time recognizing I can't focus on this too much or else I'll miss the content that I need to answer. And then also taking breathing breaks. Our body still has physiological needs during the exam, and breaks is still something that we need while we're taking an exam. Taking that time to step back, take a deep breath in and out can help us to become relaxed, and especially can help us to reapproach the exam if we still have questions. Sometimes what I really like to do, going back to that part about going back to the questions, I really like to, after I've gone through the first run through, take that breath and then reapproach looking back through the questions and answering the ones I didn't get to. So if you found that you really liked the topics of today and you felt the tips were really helpful, Success Coaching is the office for you. Success Coaching provides one-on-one coaching in a multitude of academic success areas, whether that be time management, test taking, test preparation, study skills, anything that you can think of. These are general academic skills rather than specific courses, and yet the sessions are based around the needs of the student. So even though you may have a whole bunch of different courses that have their own needs, the coach can work with you to develop specific skills for those coaches based on general academic skills. For example, they can work with you on how to study for your chem class, but also work with you on how to study for your psych class and make kind of individualized plans around your needs. What's especially helpful about coaching is they never make you do anything you don't want to do. So if Cornell Notes isn't your thing, they're not going to make you do it. How do you register? You can sign up for a session through Starfish, or what you can do is you can email Task to sign up for an appointment at tutoring@csuohio.edu, or you can call Task to sign up for an appointment. Either way, all sessions are held via Zoom, so keep that in mind. And this is how you sign up via Starfish, so I'll just leave this up here for a couple seconds so that if anyone wants to take a picture of it, they can. Or you can even pause the video right now for this to be taken as a picture of. All right, and that's the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope to see you in Success Coaching, and I hope your exams go well.